There has been a lot of talk about how social media has impacted some of the riots we've seen rip across vast swathes of the country following the tragedy in Southport last week, and how just a small amount of disinformation can morph into something far, far bigger. Today we've seen dozens of people up in court charged with violent disorder, weeping in the dock, humiliated as they plead guilty to rioting and looting. Some of them told the court that they had been inspired to go out by posts they had seen online, and many of those people may have been involved in groups on Telegram, the Russian-founded network which allows users to post encrypted, anonymous messages into groups. Tonight, The Sun can disclose that around a dozen groups with 100,000 members between them have been posting extreme far-right content and helping to orchestrate and target specific locations at some of the riots over the last few days. And to give you an example, earlier today a list of 39 addresses was sent out to these members, pumped around these groups, with those people told to go and target those specific locations. And they included asylum seeker hotels, immigration detention centres, even solicitors who were willing to take on the cases of refugees and asylum seekers in this country, something that is their legal right, were being targeted and set up for some of the horrific scenes that we've seen where buildings have been set on fire, had their windows smashed in, and even had their contents stolen from them. Indeed, some of the organisers in these groups even sent out twisted step-by-step guides to their members, telling them exactly how they should approach rioting, a walkthrough booklet in effect for looting. And they included tips like always wearing tear gas masks, using balaclavas, using burner phones to communicate with fellow rioters, and, unless legally obliged to, giving a fake name. It also recommends that if rioters are arrested by the police, they should say absolutely nothing. Another common trend across some of these groups is sick Nazi ideology, and also the term of white power being dropped on a number of occasions, very casually and without repentance, express open support for both Nazi ideology and racism. Many of the messages in these groups are far too explicit to read out. They include numerous racial slurs and other libelous claims against specific people who are of minority descent or are migrants in this country. However, there are a few that I want to point out. And remember, these people are posting from behind the cloak of anonymity. They know that most people will not be able to identify who they are. One user wrote in one of these groups, "The mosques must burn," before another responds with them inside it as well, referring to ordinary Muslims who want to attend their place of worship. Later on in the chain, someone calls for, quote, white lads to, quote, tribe up and arm up to fight back. Thousands of people have joined these groups just in the last few days alone, following the triple stabbing in Southport last week at a Taylor Swift-themed dance club, which left 3 children tragically dead. One of the lies that helped push the violence to the extreme levels that we haven't seen in this country for well over a decade, was the claim that a so-called Muslim knifeman had infiltrated a vigil for those 3 girls last Tuesday. That nugget of false information was pushed in many of these Telegram channels, including one that had about 8,000 members, which followers reacting to that news that this Muslim knifeman had arrived said that it would make them determined to, quote, fight for my Anglo-Saxon race. And another said, quote, our hate for evil means nothing if we do not act on it. Well, later our newspaper uncovered that the alleged Muslim knifeman was not a Muslim at all. It is in fact, allegedly, a 32-year-old white man called Jordan Davies, who has since been charged with possessing a blade in public. But to those on Telegram and these 100,000 activists in these far-right groups, that simply does not matter. The damage has already been done, and that nugget of information has got far, far bigger than it was ever really meant to. We asked Telegram earlier today why these channels were still allowed to operate when they expressly expose and espouse racist and Islamophobic views. Telegram did not respond to our request for comment. And tonight, a former cabinet minister has called on Telegram to clamp down on some of these channels or face being banned from running its app in the UK. Alex Shelbrooke told The Sun it was also important to drill into exactly why these channels had not been removed, and if actually Telegram were happy to silently encourage them to exist on the platform.
Clearly, they earn a very good living out of social media platforms and online platforms, and the amount of people that use them these days. I think that comes with that is a responsibility to manage your platforms properly and lawfully and reasonably. So I think that there is a burden of responsibility on any of those social media companies to look at the content that they are allowing to be broadcast or placed onto their sites and review it far more quickly and remove anything and then block the user whenever they can. There's some awful stuff appearing on social media in the last week or so, and it stays on there for days. And even if you complain about something, it can take some time for it to be removed and the user to be blocked. But I think there needs to be a lot better at managing the information. You know, the misinformation around this whole incident has been appalling. You know, the fact that a false name was put up first of all, and there are still some people who believe that, who haven't almost caught up with the current update on the person arrested and charged. They still think it goes back to what that very first post was. And it's, you know, from my understanding, it's been shown to have links to other states. So, you know, the companies bear a responsibility for allowing this to be posted and for allowing it to remain in full view without either, first of all, removing it, blocking the user, and then posting some sort of clarification for anybody that's liked or reposted it. I think policing has to look at the resources they have available across the country, because the number of public order trained officers per force is pro rata of how big that force is. So the aspect of mutual aid, where you send officers from other counties over to assist, has worked for most events, most protests, demonstrations, disorder type events, but you're only there for a short period of time. You go over, do your duty, whatever it is, for 10, 12 hours, then you drive back to where you came from. I think what they're planning here is to take a group of officers, maybe for 5 or 7 days or whatever period of time that they suggest, accommodate them somewhere, and then be able to deploy them much quicker, and also be able to use them on a more regular basis. So you could go on a mutual aid deployment for, say, 5 days. You'll stay somewhere, and then you'll deploy into whichever force needs you, and maybe centrally located in certain places, strategic locations, so you can get to a force within, say, an hour or so. So maybe different places across the country. It's similar to, and this is deployment only, not tactics, similar to what we did in the miners' dispute in 84, 85. We evolved mutual aid, and we actually went for longer periods of time. So I was deployed for like a week at a time, staying in almost like barrack type accommodation, but accommodation where we stayed, and we were then deployed to different force areas that needed us. If you've got violent disorder, as we've seen over the last 3-4 days, it's not sustainable to keep transporting officers across force boundaries. So you're going from, I don't know, like sort of like Cleveland down to Humberside or wherever, or South Yorkshire. The Yorkshire forces aren't too bad because they're quite close. But looking at where some of those other county forces going from Durham down to South Yorkshire, isn't that far, but it's still like an hour or so journey down. It's probably a sensible move that we look at, policing looks at, centrally locating or strategically locating a significant number of public order trained officers that are ready on standby to respond at different places in the country. If you're detaining somebody at these violent protests, violent incidents, they've gone beyond, for me, they've gone beyond protests, but that's a separate question. But these violent incidents where people are committing violent acts on the street, then they should be arrested as soon as possible, if not on the day itself, which obviously sometimes isn't operationally an option for you. So once they're arrested, put into the criminal justice system. But that's got its own issues. But for policing, it's about arresting them, getting them off the street, and then hopefully a court then decides either to give them bail conditions not to attend these protests again, which means you can arrest them if they do turn up, or they keep them in custody. And I think some of the initial ones are being kept in custody, which is putting pressure on an already creaking criminal justice system and prison population. And we heard that about a week or so ago, that there may be people being released early from prison. So the prison population has got its own issues. So it's now put on top of it a couple of hundred people who are either remanded waiting for trial or remanded waiting for sentence, is going to cause more problems in there. And it'll delay other trials that are already awaiting court dates. for me, prisons should be a deterrent to committing criminal offences. But again, prisons should also be only be used for people that are a risk to other members of society, to the public. So I think bear in mind we've been doing almost like the same thing for years and years and years, just basically imprisoning people and locking them up. I think there needs to be a more sensible view of what sort of sentence should be imposed on some crimes as opposed to others. Yes, you can attach the maximum sentence, and it's always the maximum that gets quoted. You can attach a maximum sentence of imprisonment for every offence, but I think some more reasonable or sensible approaches for some crimes that don't involve either loss to people, harm to people, needs to be reviewed. If our prison population isn't big enough to accommodate the offenders we've got in society, then you either build more prisons or you have to have a different approach on who you lock up and why you're locking them up and how long for. Because clearly the prison population is at capacity now, which means the venues are at capacity. So we either have more venues built, which is costly, or you review the types of people and what offences you are imprisoning people for. There's a history within some protest groups and the far right, of which there's a minority clearly involved in this because of their ideologies and where they're targeting. I think they've taken along with them some younger, more impressionable people. So they've now got almost like a group of people that are either agreeing with them or following them. And I think they're using those people basically to carry out these offences, which is why you're seeing some first offenders, some quite young first offenders, but then some others with a long history of criminal convictions. And I think the sad indictment of what's been happening is that these young people are going to get convicted of fairly serious offences because they've misjudged, they've misunderstood, or they've followed along an ideology that actually they didn't quite understand and didn't understand where it was taking them. I think it's sad for them, but by the same token, you have to be responsible for your actions and what you do. And that's why many people are saying to some of these individuals that are turning up, be careful what you're getting into, because you could find yourself with a fairly serious criminal conviction. There are others that for them, this is almost like an occupational hazard. They are well used to the criminal justice system and well used to convictions. But for the younger ones, the first conviction ones, I think they've been almost sucked into this, sadly, because they've been taken in by the wrong suggestions. They've used Southport, which for me is nothing to do with what they're protesting about now. There's no links to mass immigration, etc., or illegal immigrants from that awful incident. But it's been used now almost as a catalyst to get people out the streets, and I think is attracting people on the streets that have got no experience of violence, disorder, convictions, arrests, etc.